Good afternoon, everyone. We'll kick off. Just let everyone know as you wander in, there'll be questions at the end, and this webinar will be being recorded. All right, today we're joined by Will Gold, an accredited practicing dietitian, veteran, and founder of Dig In Health. Will served in the Royal Australian Air Force as an aircraft mechanic engineer before transitioning into his career focused on nutrition and preventative health. After completing his nutrition studies at University of Newcastle, he's worked across Indigenous health, community health, regional and remote Australia, and private practice. He's also a certified permaculture consultant, combining evidence-based nutrition with the sustainable approaches to improving long-term health. Drawing in both his military experience and clinical expertise, Will is focused on helping veterans and their families improving their physical and mental well-being through practical nutrition and lifestyle strategies. Today, he'll be taking us through the 101 of ketogenesis or ketogenesis, explaining what ketogenic health is, how it works, and what the emerging research tells us about the potential role in brain health, traumatic brain injuries, and overall metabolic health. Please welcome Will Gold. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Rusty. All right, now let's get my screen thing. All right, got the screen up. Good to go. Now I'm on the wrong page, aren't I? Let's go back. All right, thanks, Frosty. All right, we're gonna do a bit of a deep dive into ketosis, and how it may be used in an adjunct treatment for traumatic brain injuries. But just as a little disclaimer, that today's talk is not or not to be taken as personal or individual medical advice. If you have questions following today's talk about how applying ketosis or a ketogenic eating plan to your treatment, if you've got questions about that, definitely have a chat with your GP. I think one of the main goals of this conversation today is for veterans who are considering utilizing this as a treatment strategy to actually have a good grounded conversation with your health professional team, including your GP, and help them also understand the benefits of it and how to better manage and support you guys. So, on that note, let's get into it. So, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to understand ketogenesis or keto. I'll probably refer to it in a few different ways, um, but keto for short, and how it may be used to support veterans living with a TBI. Um, there, in the session today, we're going to go through some potential benefits and some of the mechanisms as to why ketosis is showing some promising evidence for as a treatment modality. It supports or is purported to support reducing inflammation and improve cognition. But there are also some important limitations for us to acknowledge with where the research is at, and discuss how should be using this in a as part of a multimodal treatment strategy, and definitely with some medical supervision. So we'll touch a little bit on that. And as discussed, want you guys to be confident asking questions about this. As Frosty and I have discussed offline, we have it's pretty well understood that in Australia we have quite a conservative approach to medicine, and in my own um, in my own field for sure, nutrition guidelines, government guidelines, they move very, very slowly. And you'll find a lot of dietitians who might, have the best intentions and following the evidence base are still sort of stuck uh, utilizing guidelines that are just not at the tip of the spear of where current research is at. And so, it does really these days pay to do your own research and ask those critical questions. Although, as said, there's a lot of conservative medical practitioners out there, And so sometimes you got to knock on a few doors to get the right answers for this stuff. So I'm sure you guys have all sort of found that with some of the different modalities that no doubt you're going to be explore or have already been exploring um, with treatment. And so we're also going to go through just some the practical application of getting your body into ketosis. So I'm going to run you through just the mechanisms there of how it all works, and you'll find it's actually pretty straightforward. It's the sustainability side that's the tricky part for the most part. All right. So here's in preparation for this. I can say personally I've used a keto approach for a number of male clients with psychiatric disorders. There's a new area for me in the last couple of years to explore this, and so actually doing a bit of a deep dive into explicitly being used in TBIs was something new to me, but definitely we found that there's some really interesting early evidence out there for it. So I'll just go through some of the things I found. So a lot of this is still in early trial phases. That's probably a big takeaway for you guys is that there's not an extremely long-term established science base for keto and TBIs. But on that note, the keto approach has been around for nearly 100 years. So just something to consider that whilst we're talking explicitly about TBIs, ketogenic diets is what it's typically known as, but ketosis or ketogenesis been around and used safely with children with epilepsy for nearly 100 years. So it's incredibly well studied, well understood the mechanisms and very safe, given how it's been used. And we now see it used across a range of different chronic diseases, including cancer. Keto is now becoming more widely adopted as a supportive therapy in cancer treatment. So that's not really controversial these days, but it's again with conservative approaches in medicine, it's not widely used or promoted, but it's pretty well established. Um, so ultimately, for a TBI, which in the same vein as the psychiatric disorders, a lot of the theory is around changing um, the energy system of the brain. The brain primarily prefers to use glucose, which comes from carbohydrate-rich foods, and uh, engaging our body to adapt to ketosis is just purely, in simple form, switching that energy source and over a period of time, the body and a very large majority of the cells in the body will adapt to using what we call ketone bodies. So ketones or ketone bodies just the alternate name of the energy compound that's alternate to glucose that comes from dietary fats or our own fat stores. Um, and it's considered that um, high diets high in glucose or when we're having not sugar in per se, but diets rich in carbohydrates um where they're not utilized well by the body will promote and support inflammation or which is something that we're really from what I've learned where is really important in TBIs, trying to manage the inflammation in the brain. And so that's why keto or keto diets are really um, considered a new or alternative to support TBIs, really reducing inflammation and swelling. Uh, so let's have a look at I'll just go through each of the four quarters here on the page. So most studies, if you're not aware, they start off with rodent models. Just about every pharmaceutical on the planet or every hypothesis we run through in the medical world starts off with rodent studies. So you've got here the multiple rodent TBI studies show that ketosis can reduce brain swelling, cell death, and oxidative stress and may improve behavioral and memory outcomes after injury. So that alone is a pretty promising start. The reason they use rodents is the comparative to our DNA is actually a very close comparison with our DNA. So generally speaking, if we can show benefit um, and potentially prove a hypothesis in rodent studies, we that's the key linchpin to move forward onto human trials. So the fact that that's well established already shows good promise for human studies. So moving across the top, recent trial in adults with severe TBI in ICU found a ketogenic regime could reliably induce ketosis, so get the ketone bodies producing early on, and was well tolerated. So we're now establishing safety with no major clinical side effects. So there's multiple phases to how we have to prove that there's benefit. We don't generally get to that till the end. It's all about safety and proving that the mechanisms actually work. So, says here some patients did develop high triglycerides or episodes of low blood sugar, and both of those are to be expected with a keto diet. So that's another point to consider is managing and monitoring your lipid levels, cholesterol levels, that sort of stuff, which would be best done by your GP. So third one down the bottom, 2017 scoping review highlighted that while animal data are consistently positive, human studies to date have been small, heterogeneous, and focused mainly on biochemical markers or safety rather than cognition, mood, or functional recovery. So we've moved well beyond 2017 now, but these scoping reviews, they tend to just go through what evidence is available and pool it together. It's not necessarily high quality. It's just trying to get a an umbrella overview of where the evidence base is at. But already in 2017, we can see that there's through these types of studies that we're proving or getting the baseline for safety, and that's really important. That any conservative health practitioner that may want to support you guys with initiating ketosis as a supportive therapy, we want to know it's safe, and we want to know it's safe specifically for the intended treatment. So with TBI, so that's really good early signs here that we know that there's really good safety and of safety profile of utilizing this for this specific case. Um, the last one, low carb eating plans, or keto is a very low carb eating plan, are hard to sustain, possibly interact with other medical conditions as well as medication. So again, so important to have your GP on board and also having them understand how how ketosis works. Um, the main probably issue I come across is people on diabetic medication. That's one of the ones we really want to be wary of. Diabetic medications are specifically designed to manage glucose levels. When we remove glucose as the primary fuel source, there's definitely some risks there, particularly with the kind of third level or third line diabetes meds. So that's when you're getting close to having to use insulin. So anyone who is a type 1 who diabetic who does require uh, insulin would have to take things very slow in terms of considering applying this and really get your head around everything there is to manage because it's a little bit trickier. There's quite a bit of a safety risk there if you're not managing the medication side of things. So, with that said, we know we've got a hypothesis with the mechanisms in the brain. We understand it's safe. It's used in the acute care scenario in the ICU. So we're really establishing that this has some teeth to it. Um, so reliability of the studies and being able to prove the outcomes is really sort of where we're at with the research. It's can we reproduce reproducible studies with reproducible outcomes. And so obviously the things we want to see is consistently the effects of the secondary brain damage, so swelling, inflammation, oxidative stress, and cell death. So that we really we want to know, or we want to keep tracking research. This is for you guys. You want to keep tracking research with your GP or other psychiatrist if they're not comfortable initially to really show that there's efficacy. That's really what we're looking for is to be able to prove that these things are safe and effective and that they're going to be repeatable in the study. So, that's exciting to see that the people researching in this space are already there, that this is what they're trying to prove. And generally it does take quite a few years of repeating the same kind of data before we see a shift in the sort of mainstream protocol. In dietitian world, things take 20 years before of establishing repeatable data before guidelines change. Our current guidelines in Australia are already 20 years old, and they're based off evidence from 40 years ago, just to show you how slow guidelines move. So yeah, it's early days, and whilst we might be seeing heaps of research showing efficacy, the guidelines and the your regular practitioners might still be waiting for the guidelines to shift, which could still be years away. Um, so there is a number of little nuances to the research as well in terms of not just using the diet, but using other um, compounds and things, supplements, that sort of stuff. So there's little sort of offshoots in the research around not just the keto diet, it's all the keto food eating plan. There's other elements to it. So I'm not going to go too much into that, but it's good to see that they're exploring outside of just the ketogenic foods and looking at other ways and other supplements or protocols to build on top of it. The fact that it's safe and considered now effective in the research, that they're building onto these research trials and tapping in different modalities or elements to the dietary protocols. So, all right, so what is ketosis or ketogenesis? So, in short, very simply, is maintaining your total carbohydrate intake below 5% of your daily energy requirements. So most low carb diets are considered anywhere between 50 and 150 grams of carbohydrate. So another way to think of it is a slice of bread will get you about 15 grams of carbohydrates. Um, if you were to start adding up salads and things you wouldn't consider carbohydrates, you have a couple of meals worth of some, winter veggies or sort of your green salad things. You'll probably already be at 20 or 30 grams of carbohydrates before you're even looking at a slice of bread. So they are very, very strict. So they are predominantly 70% fat, 25 to 30% protein, and like I said, less than 5% carbohydrate. That's really important to maintain that um, carbohydrate intake roughly between 30 to 50 grams. And I'm maybe getting into that in the next page, but it's really about the insulin production. So I think I'm going to get into that in another page, but I'll come back to that and talk about that in a sec. But when we're talking about 60 to 70% fats in the diet, we're looking at, as you can see, the olive oil, avocado, some nuts. We have to be careful with nuts, eggs, fatty fish, lots of animal proteins, and basically eliminating all grains. So if you think of your five food groups, you got your yeah meat, dairy, your veggie group. So your veggies are generally speaking, they're a tricky one. That there's a lot of vegetables out there that you wouldn't necessarily think of that have carbohydrates in them. So green peas, as an example, is something you have to be wary of. So it's not just cutting out grains, and there's a number of veggies you got to look out for. Some dairy has to be closely monitored. But generally, your meat, chicken, eggs, fish, they're all fine. And most of your non-starchy veggies are fine. But yeah, the takes a bit of learning and having some tools to monitor this is really important. And obviously, sugary foods, sugary drinks, but not a chance. You're gonna sustain or maintain a ketogenic diet having basically any processed food. So it does make you eat healthy. So the kicker here is it's not just about the fuel source in the body. It's going to force you to really understand your food and eat whole foods, real foods, because you have to be in control of what you're eating, what you're putting in your mouth. And it really comes down to understanding where your food comes from as well, which is there's a positive there that your what we call your food literacy is going to go up a lot. So you're going to understand quite a lot about your food and just generally being healthier version of yourself. So there is a plus in that aside from just switching your fuel source from glucose to ketones. Here we go. So here's the how do we get into it? So um, glucose being our primary fuel source, which we get obviously from a lot of foods. We get it from fruit, we get it from grains, we'll get it from some dairy as well, um, and many vegetables. With our body utilizing glucose from these carbohydrate foods as a fuel source. Glucose itself doesn't get access to majority of the organs that it needs to get into. It requires something called insulin. So insulin is a hormone secreted in our pancreas in response to glucose. So when we digest these carbohydrate-rich foods, they will be broken down through chemical digestion in the mouth and in by the gastric juices in the stomach, where we then these carbohydrate foods are converted into glucose and then absorbed into the small intestine. And then as that glucose starts entering the bloodstream, the pancreas and the brain are all communicating to each other and signaling to the pancreas to release insulin. So insulin is the primary hormone. I like to think of insulin like a cab driver and glucose is in the back seat. The glucose needs to go for a ride. It's got somewhere to go to. There'll be certain organs in the body that are requiring a little top up of glucose for their function. Um, and insulin's the driver that's going to take them through the bloodstream to get to where they need to go. And so the key with initiating ketosis and an uh, alternate fuel source for the body is we need to eliminate insulin from the system. It's not entirely eliminated, but you'll see in the graphs there, we've got a carb diet versus a ketogenic one. And you see the spike in insulin over the time frame. So we don't eliminate insulin, but we get it down to a much lower level that we basically trigger our starvation mode. So to the run into ketosis takes anywhere from 36 hours up to can even be up to sort of 72 hours, getting 4 or 5 days. If you've never got into ketosis before, it can take up to 4 or 5 days for the body to adapt. But the initial phase is eliminating glucose out of the bloodstream from the digestion. Once we've eliminated glucose, within the first 24 hours, the pancreas and the brain are recognizing that insulin is declining and that glucose is depleting. And the next phase is that the liver jumps in here and starts to empty itself of what we call glycogen. So glycogen is our stored form of glucose. We have, generally speaking, up to about 24 hours worth of stored glycogen. So we may have some stored in our muscles, small amount, and most of it in our liver. And so once insulin is basically down to really low levels, either through fasting or just the elimination of all your carbohydrates. It's the reduction in insulin that allows it's like a sister hormone to insulin, which is called glucagon. It only works once we've gotten rid of insulin. So the two hormones work in opposition to each other. You cannot release stored glycogen via the production of glucagon whilst insulin is present. It just can't be done. The body always has a preference for glucose. It's our preferred primary fuel source, and whilst we're eating it and producing insulin, you'll never trigger the glucagon hormone to release stored glycogen. And that actually goes for falling back out of ketosis, is that the second you want to sneak in one little bit of bread because you really miss it, that can put you out for multiple days out of ketosis. So it can really have a prolonged effect. And again, can take 3, 4, 5 days just from one meal that's high in carbohydrates, causing that insulin production. It can restart the whole thing. So this is where the sustainability side of it tends to be the biggest challenge for most people. So as I said, you go through this sort of 24 to 36 hour phase where your body's basically fasting from glucose, insulin's no longer being produced, glucagon is excreted to release stored glycogen. You burn through all of that, and now we're in a true what we would call a truly fasted state beyond 36 hours. But there's an adaptation phase here with ketosis, and you may or may not have come across the term called the keto flu. Um, it's very common if you've never gotten into ketosis that you then, beyond this sort of 36-hour phase of commencing the fasting phase, that some people get hit like a truck. Basically, you can kind of go down like you've been hit with an influenza virus. And what's happening here is that you're basically turning on a dormant fuel system you have never used. Our ancestors have used adapted to using them regularly, living out in nature where food scarcity is a common thing, but in our modern lives, we don't know what food scarcity is anymore. Since the advent of fridges, it's something we haven't come across in the last 70 years. So no one, if you've not done it before, you've got the capacity to do it, but it's like winding up the gears on a machine that's been frozen in time for however long you've been alive. You've not used it. So it takes a bit of time for the body and all of the different organs in the body to learn, basically over a couple of days, learn how to utilize ketones as an alternate fuel source. So there's an adaptation phase, and it usually sucks for most people, but within a couple of days, there's a light switch that essentially goes on for people, and that's when all of a sudden all the body systems come online, and they're ramping up using ketones for energy, and most people feel a mental clarity that they've never felt before, and they'll feel a big shift, and much for many people, much with I could probably go on for another hour of why we all feel like crap eating carbs. Um, that's something I don't have time for today, but a lot of people will report when they come out of that keto flu, they feel 110% for various reasons. So one of the markers that we're hoping to see benefit in um, with TBI is the inflammation and the swelling. Well, if you're a veteran, who I always say with my vets, particularly army guys, you get with your discharge papers, you get bilateral osteoarthritis in the knees and lumbar spondylosis. that's a pretty standard. Everyone gets that with their ticket out. So many guys have got so much arthritis and joint and all inflammation and swelling is everywhere. So it's a generalized benefit. There's obviously this benefit purported with the TBI, but it's systemic. When you're using ketones all through the body and you've eliminated glucose and carbohydrates, you're eliminating inflammation in the body. So it's a really big one. You might be thinking about it just from the brain benefit, but it's there's going to be a whole of body benefit here, especially if you're riddled with, lots of musculoskeletal injuries. Right. So let's put it into simple terms. Stop eating carbs for the first couple of days, eliminate them, allow for total body glycogen depletion. Then you go through what we refer to as a starvation phase. Now, on that, you don't need to be fasting from food. You need to be fasting from anything that's got glucose in it to a point, to that 30 to 50 grams of carbohydrates. So there's a very, very, very small allowance for it. That needs to be you need to hit that 30 to 50 grams. Now, just on that, some people will think, well, why have it at all? Um, there are parts of the body that will happily use that small amount of glucose under that 50 grams without impacting um, the ketogenic phase. So that's basically the daily threshold, 30 to 50 grams of carbohydrates before we see a significant insulin spike and a flip back to glucose, using glucose as a fuel source. Um, but in doing that, um, we're allowing for a lot of other benefits from the vegetables that don't have a considerable amount of glucose. So there are lots of other foods we want to include in there that have a wee bit of carbohydrate but have a lot of benefit in other parts of the body. I'm not going to go too much into that, but we don't want to just go carnivore. There's a lot of talk about carnivore diets these days, and they are, in a sense, they will effectively initiate ketosis because there is no glucose, but you don't have to go that strict, and it's not necessary. And in fact, you'll probably miss out on some good stuff that your body needs. That's sort of not part of the keto conversation, but important to understand. But that's something for another day. So there you go. You got 2 to 5 days of that sort of starvation phase or that depletion of glucose, and somewhere in there is what we call keto adaptation. And so the more people practice this, so getting in and out of ketosis, the quicker they tend to go through that starvation phase, the days 2 to 5. So to the point where some athletes, particularly endurance athletes, that do like ultra marathons, will actually practice coming in and out of ketosis as a way to switch their fuel source mid-race, and they can actually do it on the run. So you can turn it on with like a light switch when you practice going in and out, in and out. So the ultra marathon runners that are smashing, they don't want to have to rely on glucose or the long, like the Tour de France, things like that. They have to keep their glucose levels up. But if you're some athletes will prefer to practice the keto adaptation in their training so that mid-race they can flip the switch, deplete their glycogen, and go straight into using their own fat stores for fuel. And so there's no practicing it regularly, they bypass the keto flu stage, and their body knows just to hit the switch. Um, when I was doing a lot of middle distance running, you'd refer to like hitting the wall, where you'd get to 10 or 15 Ks and boff, you hit the wall. That's you running out of glucose and having to try and initiate the glycogen depletion. But when you're under a high amount of stress running, it's actually really hard, and that's why people will say they'll hit the wall, and that is something that they train out of them in athletes. So it's something our body knows how to do it. We just sometimes need a little bit of practice to make it work well for us. So how do we initiate it? So some simple things is obviously really understanding carbohydrates. I'd probably say that is the number one takeaway is getting to know what carbs are in what. And that's why seeing a dietitian, we've got food lists. There's some really easy resources out there. I mean, you've got AI tools as well that you can use these days to help identify it. But as I said, this stuff's been around for a while, so just understanding how to maintain 30 to 50 grams of carbohydrates a day. There's stacks of resources out there to help you do it. But getting a dietitian to help you design a meal plan, making sure it is a bit more balanced. It's not you're not just eating, a steak every day. There are some downsides to your bowel health if all you do is eat red meat and you don't have any fiber in there. So that's not going to bode well for your mental health when your bowels really start playing up on you. But planning in any change to your eating patterns, planning ahead and having a really good understanding of like a weekly shop is probably one of your biggest takeaway tools. So having a meal plan, having a shopping list every week, you got your meals planned out, and you can just sort of rotate or roster through the same sort of run of meals. Um, It gets a bit tricky when it comes to eating out. This is why the sustainability of this is tricky. But again, planning and knowing where you can go or what you can choose off a menu doesn't mean you have to never go to a pub again and have a counter meal, but chips are definitely off the menu. Um, so a couple of notes here on the challenges with this is of obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but w whether you realize it or not, cortisol, whether that's like PTSD cortisol or just day-to-day stuff, is that when we're in high stress environments, cortisol production triggering your fight or flight system has a link to or has a mechanism, I should say, to altering your glucose production. Um, and so this is something definitely to understand. And I've started using glucose monitors, so it's now pretty widely accessible to get these continuous glucose monitors. You don't have to be a diabetic. You've just got to pay. I have some guys that when we're talking about weight loss or low carb diets and their cognition, their mental clarity, that sort of stuff, putting them on just lower carbohydrate diets and trying to help them lose some visceral fat. I'll now start putting these guys on these continuous glucose monitors. So they're $65 and you get it 10 days worth of data on your glucose, but you can also see how poor sleep and cortisol and alcohol, all these things affect your blood glucose levels. So um, it does get a little bit more complicated if you have a lot of stress going on. It can definitely uh, play a little bit of havoc on your blood glucose levels. So something to just keep in mind that this a keto diet's not just a single solution. It needs to be used with other modalities, and working on your stress, and if there's PTSD or anxiety or other conditions, this is one little part of the puzzle of the full picture. I'm sure you guys are talking about that with other professionals and whatnot on how to manage stress, and sleep should be a big part of that as well. So when you have poor quality of sleep, you'll have elevated cortisol levels the next day, and that'll again affect glucose metabolism. So yeah, in short, if you're not aware, when we have a fight or flight response, um, we see a heightened sensory perception. So our eyes, ears, like we're hypersensitive or hypervigilant. We have high heart rate, high respiratory rate, but we also in someone who's uh, having glucose as their primary fuel source, you will see a little spike in blood glucose levels because part of that is releasing glucose into the bloodstream, preparing you to flee from whatever the threat or the trigger is. So part of the fight or flight mechanism. So something definitely to understand the nuance in how cortisol might affect you just now day to day, and going to a keto diet and not having that glucose spike is another way to avoid some of the effects of cortisol and glucose, and how that might be having more exacerbating effects on mental health, mood, and brain function. Alcohol's a tricky one. So, beer's got carbs in it. So, that's something that if you're also drinking alcohol, you're gonna have a real hard think about how you're gonna plan and um, plan your diet, what your eating plan is. Now, some people will think, oh, well, I hear this all the time. People say, oh, vodka and water's safe because there's no carbs in it, which is bullshit, to be honest. Just so the thing with alcohol is it is an alternate fuel source, so the alcohol percentage in there can play havoc on your preferred fuel source. So it's not just the carbs in the beer; it's actually the alcohol percentage. Um, that our bodies will preference alcohol over any other fuel source. And depending on how long you're drinking and how much you're drinking, it could drop you out of ketosis as well. The body will preference the alcohol because it recognizes it as a toxin, and it'll stop the production of ketones and metabolizing fat in preference for metabolizing alcohol. Um, so, having some kind of spirits neat, one night, it may induce you to drop out of ketosis, and also the effects that alcohol is going to have on mood and the brain as well. So, um, yeah, so that's definitely something to consider. All right, I just wanted to touch on this, kind of going back to my discussion early on around guidelines and how painfully long they take to catch up with the research is interestingly the US just updated their guidelines. I would say I'm a big proponent of low carbohydrate diets. It's very very hard to find dietitians out there that advocating low carb diets or ketogenic diets. I tend to get every month I might just get one or two inquiries from people all over Australia just looking for a dietitian that is confident in supporting them to initiate ketosis. So there's just not a lot of dietitians out there that are comfortable doing or have experience or even pro keto. Um, and that's because the Aussie guidelines are still based on the old pyramid. If anyone remembers the old pyramid, which is the upside down version of this, the grains at the bottom form the largest part of the food group. Now, for those wondering, the food pyramid was made that they changed it at least 15 years ago, but all they did was change the shape. So there was a lot of stigma around the food pyramid, and they just turned it into a circle. It's actually ridiculous when you see that the food pyramid, they didn't actually change it, they just changed the shape that the food's structured in. So the current Australian guidelines still promote a high carbohydrate diet. They say 45 to 65% of a healthy Australian adult should be consuming carbohydrates. So that's nearly two-thirds of your diet. So it's still a pyramid, it's still the old food pyramid. So what America did, they updated their guide. They did a review. I think they did it over about a 12-month period and reviewed all the current evidence around the benefits of high protein, high animal fats, and reduction of grains. And this is what they come up with. I think it's quite funny actually that they just created an upside down pyramid. It's a bit of a FU to the old pyramid model that's been around forever, but I've been practicing this way now for the majority of my clients for at least 4 or 5 years. So it's actually just nice to be sort of a little bit vindicated here that this is where, when reviews finally happen and they're using current evidence, and this is what we get. So it's great. So there's actually there's a lot of people that don't like it, but when you look down the side here, it's pretty sensible, pretty straightforward. These are the kind of the main topics they pulled out of their updated guidelines. Eat real food, high quality protein at every meal, include plenty of vegetables and fruits. Now the fruits thing, if we were considering a keto diet, we'd only have to pull out the fruits and the whole grains, and we're pretty much ticking all the boxes here. So if you actually look at it, the US dietary guidelines from a keto lens, you'll see, what do we want to do? Drink water and don't drink sweetened beverages. We want to limit alcohol. We don't want to limit uh, processed foods. We want to include healthy fats from whole foods. Like it pretty much spells out a keto diet minus a couple of very minor points in there, which is almost all your fruits we have to avoid, and your whole grains. So it's pretty close. So we're gonna stop in a bit and go through some questions, but just obviously there's me, and if you're looking for a dietitian to support you, give us a shout if you really want to tailor this to yourself. If you're really keen to learn more and stay up to date with where the current research is at, I can't recommend Low Carb Down Under enough. It's Aussie YouTube channel. They have a website as well. So if you're looking for low carb practitioners, so if you're looking for GPs or specialists, allied health in your area, you can log on to Low Carb Down Under, and they have a Find a Practitioner tab, and you can try and find people in your local area. So there are, like I said, there's GPs listed on there, there's specialists and allied health. So you'll find my details on there as well. So they don't have to be in your area, but sometimes it's nice to find someone local to you that you can go and sit down and actually have a face-to-face chat with. So if you're looking to connect with someone, there's some psychologists on there as well, so that's good. I know there's some really good psychologists in this space that are really pro ketogenic diets and have a heck of a lot of knowledge. Um, but they have some great YouTube channels, so I was gonna bring one up. I won't, but Low Carb Down Under YouTube has a heap of talks. They generally have a conference every year, and they'll upload every talk from that conference. So every speaker that speaks at their multi-day conference, that their talks will go up online, so you'll have hours and hours of stuff to digest on this stuff, about the benefits of low carb and ketogenic diets, not just from a brain health, mental health, but all sorts of conditions. So you'll see that there's really a big push from a really wide group of medical practitioners that are basically proving again and again how beneficial these low carb and keto approaches can be for quite a number of conditions. So, and their talks, they'll go through the current research and ongoing trials and where they're at, so you can get little updates from time to time. So yeah, that's it from me. I think that's the last of my slides. So I'll hand it back over to Frosty, and I think we're going to go through some potential questions.
Beautiful, Will. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and time with us, man. That was really informative. And I think we can do a lot with this down the track. So, mate, thank you so much. Well, we'll move into questions. If you've got questions, you can put them in the chat. I've got a couple here to kick us off. If you guys, you're welcome to ask questions too. First one I got, man, is what about ketone powders? So I'd heard about these a while ago. In fact, that was how I was introduced to ketones, was ketone powders to try and boost people into ketosis. And we saw some people trialing them with some pretty all right results, and they're actually testing their glucose and could see the difference in the ketone powders. Obviously, it's not ideal, but do you know much about them or for people kicking off into ketosis?
Not specifically. I mean, the only supplement I've personally come across is MCT oil. So there's medium chain triglycerides, the derivative of coconut oil. I mean, in a simple sense, they're all trying to do the same thing. They're just trying to get the body utilized. I guess if it's without knowing the specific product, I'd say they are trying to mimic a ketone body, what the body manufactures. My thought is like once you've done it, if you've done it a few times and you've trialed it, you're going to get quicker at doing it. The cost of a supplement and the benefit of it is, the body knows how to do this stuff. I'd just say trust the body and, it's understanding your carbs, depletion of carbohydrates and insulin is your main focus. If you want to use a supplement out there I don't know how that's going to necessarily speed anything up. Like, as I said, is you become adapted to this stuff. Guys can do it mid-race in an ultra marathon, so the body has the capacity to adapt very, very quickly over time, given a bit of training. So I don't know. Most supplements out there are gimmicks, but I mean, I'd be happy to look at like one-on-one with someone going, if you part of what I do for people is like, hey, I heard about this. Can you tell me more? And I'll go away and do a bit of research and have a bit of a look at it. So, I'm more than happy for anyone to throw some supplements at me that I've just been looking into all these new peptides and things like that. And, there's always some hype about something new, but I'd say like there's really kind of three main ways that I would say you can initiate ketosis. One is fasting. So I've done it with shakes before. I part of doing what I do, I just experiment with stuff so I can actually talk through it. So I went on OptiFast shakes for shit 8 weeks. It was boring as bat shit, but I mean it works. So OptiFast shakes is like the OG sort of get you into ketosis, very low carb shakes. I've done it that way. I've done it with a 36 to 48 hour fast, getting into ketosis. I've also heard recently of this sort of sardine protocol where all you do is eat like 3 or 4 tins of sardines for the first couple of days because they're really high in fat and oils. I mean, all they're doing is eliminating carbs. They're all doing the same thing, and like I said, the body knows what to do. You just got to give it a little bit of time.
Yeah, and I think we'll also look at what the quality of the food we're putting into ourselves too, because it is building our cells.
Yeah, so on that is interesting. One of my very first sort of dipping the toes into this space was back in uni, which was like 14 years ago now. Is I got given a topic to research, which was looking at is there a plausible link between omega-3 deficiency and depression? And I found that really interesting because in that research I did, I found that under the microscope, if you were to take like a biopsy of the brain, you can actually find that the structure of the brain in depression actually mimics that of what you would see in omega-3 deficiency. The thing is, the brain's a big fatty tissue, and depending on the types, and this is actually probably goes into where I see people fall down even doing carnivore is when you don't get the right balance of fat, you can alter the composition of the brain and how the brain communicates with the rest of the body. Now, in a neuron in a cell in the body, it actually has like a magnetic field to it, and different fats will throw a different sort of frequency, magnetic frequency. And so if all you do is eat red meat, tomahawk steaks on a carnivore diet, and it's of poor quality. So there's an argument here around the quality, like grass-fed, pasture-raised steaks have a higher omega-3 content in them. So understanding your food, where it comes from, having a variety of good quality omega-3s in there through fish, seafood, as well as not just going to Coles and getting steak because it's going to be grain fed and full of saturated fat. Yeah, there's more to it, but yeah, definitely it's not just there's so much to learn here. I don't know. I think I've gone off on a tangent here, but understanding the quality of your diet, not just the content of the fats, really important. Yeah, much more to learn.
No, absolutely. And we're lucky in the Riverina. We've got link-ins now to some really good local produce that are going and actually getting their fats from the animals and the proteins tested at the university to see the profiles, which is going to be really interesting for us to look at.
Yeah, there's a group in the US doing this with a lot of the regenerative farmers and showing like how when cows are put on so there's a difference between
Mm,
grass and pasture. Or like
mm,
a pasture is trying to mimic a prairie, which would have a lot of
mm,
wildflowers and weeds, and so that wild foraging is actually one of the keys to raising the omega-3 index in a grass-fed cow. So this is my permaculture brain turning on here, is that just because it's out in a paddock that's green doesn't mean it's optimal. There's a lot more
mm.
to understanding where your food comes from. So pasture raised or regenerative farms that are using, a variety of crops out there for the cows to feed on is actually super important for the quality of the meat and the omega-3 index, and then what you're going to digest and put into your brain cells, essentially.
No, I love it. I think we're blessed to be in an area where we can actually look at that too.
Mm.
I've got another question online from Kieran. I think you know. He says, "G'day.
Yeah.
Any suggestions for hydration when first embarking on your keto?"
Um, yeah, that's a good point. I actually haven't covered that. So in that first 36 hours, when your body starts mobilizing stored glycogen, when your glucose is depleted, you get to the liver and the muscle stores of glycogen. Glycogen actually binds water. So one thing you will expect to experience, which has a benefit for inflammation, that this is part of the joint inflammation benefits, and I'm going to assume part of the mechanism for that secondary swelling with the TBIs is that we start pulling water out of the system. So keeping your hydration up is really important, but you will start dropping a lot of water. So keto is considered really effective for weight loss, but actually in the first couple of weeks, the majority of what people will lose could be many liters of water. So, you
Mm,
keeping up your electrolytes and keeping your water up is really important because your body is actually just dumping a lot of water that's bound up in the muscle. It doesn't mean you're getting dehydrated, but if not managed well, yeah, could definitely have an effect on your hydration levels. But yeah, mo most people would find that sitting around 100 kilos, you might drop 4 or 5 liters of fluid. It's not it's stored inside the muscles, like bound up to the glycogen. So the second you switch back to a glucose containing diet, all that fluid comes back on.
mm,
It's naturally in the muscle tissue, but yeah, definitely monitoring that. You're going to start paying a lot. So keeping your salts and your water up is definitely important, and that's going to have an effect on the bowels as well. So
mm.
definitely, it's not just hydration. You'll definitely find you might get some shifts in your bowels. One thing I can say from experience is be wary of strong black coffee when you're a couple of days into a fast. It's rocket fuel on the digestive system. So yeah, you definitely know you're definitely going to be um, notice some symptoms for sure. It is to be
Mm.
not everyone, but to be expected with your digestive system. You're really changing what the body's used to. So there's a bit of a shock there.
I reckon a lot of people might be a bit, I guess, apprehensive about such the extreme way to do the diet. So jumping fully into it, can you treat it like a dial? So are you able to kind of push toward that by reducing carbs, and then in that, is that going to when you're with your insulin, your glucose, is the fiber that you're eating along with that also helping you burn through those extra calories?
I'm trying to think about how to answer. It's kind of like two parts to that. So I guess the fiber bit I'll come back to. Because that threw me a little bit. But in short, yes, you can play around with this. Like you can go really low carb without monitoring your ketone levels or explicitly that sort of 50 grams of carbs. I have plenty of people that I'll remove mo majority of their carbs without monitoring the amount. Now, some people get quite affected with energy levels, and that'll have a knock-on effect to mood and cognition and whatnot. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I find the majority of people actually tolerate just cutting out their carbs and their grains. Now, I did allude to that earlier about carbs and grains having their own issues. And for that, I would say a good first step, and usually the hardest thing to manage getting rid of is the grain. So from a practical point of view, just learning to live without bread. The amount of bread that we consume and are reliant on, or rice for that matter, for meals, like learning to enjoy meals or adapt them without grains is probably from both a long sustainability of a keto approach, from enjoyment of meals, for many reasons. There's just a practical application with family, because if you're doing it and you've got a partner and kids at home, like you're gonna ask your kids to start eating cauliflower rice as opposed to white rice. Maybe your kids won't be into that. Like, there's a lot to learn about how, like, because if you're really sold on it but just haven't done it yet, learning to adjust meals. Like, I just say, even just your evening meals, getting used to not having grains at night. Because you think about it, if you got family, it's like Mexican meals or, tacos with corn in it. Corn's a grain. You have stir fries or curries. What do we put with it? Rice or a bit of roti or, naan bread. What's that? It's wheat. It's a grain. Um, Pasta, spag bowl, kids, pasta. What are you going to do with that? Are you going to switch it for legumes? Well, legumes also have, like, because there's legume pasta out there, these protein pastas. Learning to avoid that at nighttime is probably the most difficult one, because it's also the family and who else you're feeding, and it's those meals that a lot of people just they get stuck going, the meal's not right because it's missing the potato or it's missing the rice. So I would just say that practicing that and learning how to enjoy meals without that, learning how to adapt them. There's a million keto recipe things out there, but yeah, it's often the trickiest one, just in practical sense, is learning how to enjoy meals without it. So the fiber thing, I maybe I don't know if you can ask it again, but I didn't really know how to answer that bit.
I think more along the lines of, say you are eating fruit. So if I want a sugar hit, I'll usually go for some fruit. And then I guess my thought process behind that is, if I'm eating the whole fruit, not the juiced fruit, I'm getting all the fiber with it. So I'm not burning through the sugar straight up. I've got a lot of fiber on board, or the excess parts around the fruit that help me kind of burn through that without having that massive insulin spike.
Yeah, and if you're talking just a low carb diet, like before you're into ketosis,
Mm.
like ketosis doesn't care about fiber.
Mm.
Like it's kind of a, like, it's not a real, because like you can still have, so on a keto plan, passion fruit and strawberries are still okay. They're probably about the only two fruits you can have. They are really sweet, but have very low levels of total carbohydrates. So they're generally something you can maintain. And so, like, you could effectively have a small portion of Greek yogurt with strawberries in it with a keto cereal. Like, you can still, there's lots of little tricks where you don't feel like you're missing out on some things. You can adapt them in there. They don't blow your carbs out, and they've still got lots of fiber in there. So there's lots of ways to include good fiber in there. But if you're low carb, not keto, and you're trying to minimize glucose spikes, insulin spikes, just there's multiple reasons why you might want to do that, but always, like, using glucose monitors on people now, more recently, trying to get them to understand that every time you have a glucose spike, so something that doesn't have fiber in it, yeah, if you needed a sugar hit, um, the fiber slows the increase absorption of the glucose and decreases the amount of insulin that you produce. Now, if you're overproducing insulin, all that is doing is putting on weight around or visceral fat around your organs. Now, visceral fat, it's not good for your metabolic health, and it's going to increase inflammation, and that's not going to be good for your, if you're managing a TBI, and inflammation and swelling is a part of that. So, for multiple mechanisms, any form of glucose spike, even if you are following a low carb diet, is still something you want to avoid. So, I mean, that's my, that's really part of working with a dietitian, is to help you understand that, help monitor that through glucose monitoring, looking at your day-to-day symptoms, and just managing that, and building your sort of knowledge around how to do that yourself. So that's, I mean, that's the benefit of working with someone like me, is we work through all those things. You're never going to be perfect with this stuff. It's going to take a few goes at it. Like, expect to drop in and out of ketosis a few times. Like, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to throw your treatment out. If anything, I actually find dropping out of ketosis is actually, there's a silver lining to it, in that you get to see actually how shit you were feeling when you go back to having carbs. Like, actually having a weekend away and blowing out and having a big pasta carbonara one night because you're like, shit, I haven't had pasta in a while. Then will you wait till
Mm,
the next day, and you wait till you feel like you've been hit by a truck, like you've
mm,
had 20 beers and you feel like shit, and your inflammation is up and you're groggy and your sleep was poor, and you'll just be like, wow,
mm.
I can actually
Yeah.
cannot believe that that was what I was walking around with, normalizing as part of just eating carbs like everyone else. Like, now for me, like, I'll have a like pizza at home with the kids. I'll make it myself, but I won't make the base because I'm bloody not perfect. I'll still buy a store-bought one, and I'll wake up like feeling like I wouldn't have had any
Mm,
beers, and I'll wake up and I'll feel like shit just from one standard pizza base from bloody IGA or whatever. I feel like crap. So, think about what that's
mm.
doing every meal, every day, with all the carbs that we are consuming, all the grains, particularly the grains. So, yeah.
Well, that kind of brings us on to the final question that we'll hit you up with, is saying that, because I think a lot of us are now focused on preventative health, so being as healthy as we can to prevent certain things happening. And we see a lot of people that are on high calorie diets or high carbohydrate diets. I saw something recently that talked about the pancreas and how it might be functional for a lot of people. They might not notice that there's a lot of issues there, and that pancreas is hammering out the insulin constantly until it can't anymore. And I think is that something that you're seeing now with people that are on high carbohydrate diets, and when that pancreas kind of can't run it anymore, then they're leading into diabetes and things like that. Would that be kind of a correct assumption?
Yeah, so this is probably my, like, if I was to say what am I expert level at, it's diabetes. Like, that's really my, like, I 10, 12 years ago, I was working in remote Aboriginal communities, working with people with like pretty far gone diabetes. But in the last few years, I've really honed my skills on picking it up early. I've diagnosed multiple adults with what they call LADA, latent. It's like a latent autoimmune diabetes. I've been able to pick that up before specialists or GPs, just by seeing like some simple signs and symptoms. But one of the most important things with diabetes, there's probably two major things. Is one is that there's typically a phase that even doctors, I educate doctors about this, they don't understand. And for anyone with a myriad of musculoskeletal conditions, or you've had multiple surgeries, we've got a lot of inflammation, you get recurring illnesses. I find that for most of us, men and women, we find after 40 is sort of when everyone says, oh, my body starts falling apart. Maybe some people it's earlier, some people get on a bit later, but around 40 is like when we kind of go past this window when these things start to compound. And so when you've constantly got inflammation, injuries, pain, having to do multiple surgeries, what people are often not aware of is this sort of in the background this declining muscle mass. And so muscle is used as a protein or amino acid reservoir in times of acute healing. So every time you're healing or you're down and out with something, your body is screaming out for more protein, but by virtue that no one's telling you that. Just like when you used to go to the gym and smash out the weights in your 20, you'd smack down some extra protein to support the healing and inflammation from the stress in the gym. Every time you're in pain or there's inflammation or you've had a surgery or an illness, your body is actually screaming out for protein. It's one of the most poorly understood phases of healing is where the body will draw down your own muscle stores to get at those amino acids to repurpose them to support anywhere that healing is required. As you start depleting muscle, you start lowering your metabolism, increasing the likelihood that you're going to put on fat and particularly visceral fat, and you're going to exacerbate all sorts of energy, mood, mental health, all that sort of stuff. And it's that increasing visceral fat. So the fat, when we say visceral fat, it's the fat around your organs. If you were to find your bottom ribs, the camera's not going to go down, but you find your bottom ribs. Anyway, we'll give that up. And go to the little bit of spare tire that's sitting just below your bottom rib. If you're carrying a bit of extra weight there, you can almost be sure that that's visceral fat. And so that sits around the pancreas and the liver. The liver and the pancreas basically sit right there at the bottom of the ribs. So if you're there and you can like grab onto an extra little chunk, there's a fair likelihood that you've added visceral fat. But what you may not realizes it's probably from an accumulative years or decades of injuries, illnesses, surgeries, where your body's been slowly tapping away, draining those muscle stores, crushing your metabolism, making it more likely you're going to put on the weight or the fat around there. And inflammation goes up, prolonged healing and recovery, that those things become the norm for people. That leads into frailty and other issues like that can affect things like dementia and Parkinson's and all the rest in older age. But what as a little key indicator, if you're ever concerned about insulin, diabetes, metabolic health, one of the things that the doctors do not do very well is the pre-diabetes diagnosis. They don't do that very well. They don't pick you up in those early stages where it's totally preventable. And by virtue of that, it's by the testing that they do. So they'll do a fasting glucose. So you go and get your bloods done, they'll do a fasting glucose. Now, anywhere between it's about 5.6 to 6 millimoles per liter, millimoles per liter. Uh, is what I would start looking at as a doctor would look at it as, oh, it's under 6, you're good to go. But if that's started, it was like a few years ago, it was 5.4, and you've seen it a couple of years later, it's 5.5, a few years later, it's 5.6, that's pre-diabetes. That's what it is. You're seeing this creep, seeing this really subtle creep. You can see it in other bloods, but the thing I'd say is if you've got a concern about it, you can go do what's called an oral glucose tolerance test. So this is one of the primary ways of picking it up. But if you don't get your insulin checked, so the thing in
Mm,
pre-diabetes is your glucose levels are kept spot on in range because your pancreas is absolutely churning out as much insulin as it can to do the job of
mm,
keeping you in range. And this is the thing, if you don't actually measure blood levels of insulin, you'll never pick it up. And doctors don't do it. They don't routinely measure insulin. And so pre-diabetes is not excess glucose, it's excess insulin. And I'd ask anyone if you've been for a regular routine blood test, have you ever seen insulin get measured? I'd say zero times.
yeah,
And once you're diagnosed with diabetes, there's no point measuring insulin because it's already rooted. Your pancreas is already
yeah.
stuffed. So if you've ever got concerns, you can go and get an oral glucose tolerance test. But if you don't get the insulin measured alongside it, they'll go, yeah, you're good. Your glucose levels are fine. It's like, yeah, because your pancreas is absolutely cooking to keep it that way.
Mm.
It's a really
Prevention
easy
is
one.
better than cure, isn't it?
But sometimes you got to know to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
That's sometimes the hard thing is to actually
Mm,
push the doctor to go, no, I want this, this, and this, and I want these extra
mm.
tests. So, yeah, you just got to, if you guys are looking at keto and doing this with, conservative medical practitioners, keep asking questions is the best thing you
Yeah.
can do.
Beautiful. All right, Will, mate. Well, that will wrap it up. So thank you so much for your time today, and we'll wrap this up into a video and get it out to the masses.
Very good. Awesome, mate.
Awesome,
Great to be
man.
a
All
part of
right.
it.
Cheers, man. I'll speak to you soon.
Right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.